For nearly 2,000 years, the most powerful secret in the ancient world was hidden in plain sight. Every year, in the heart of ancient Greece, thousands gathered for a ritual they were forbidden to describe, the Eleusinian Mysteries. Dedicated to Demeter, goddess of agriculture, these rites promise something extraordinary. Not power, not wealth, but understanding of life, death, and rebirth. Philosophers, generals, and Roman emperors all took part. Yet no written record explains what truly happened inside the sacred halls. But the mysteries existed in a world where science was being born. Ancient Greek thinkers were studying nature, the mind, and the laws of life itself. Later, Roman scholars absorbed and reshaped this knowledge, blending ritual, philosophy, and early science. Were the mysteries purely religious? Or did they hide a scientific understanding of human consciousness, nature, and transformation? This is the story of the Eleusinian Mysteries, where ancient faith, Greek science, and Roman knowledge became one. Subscribe to explore the secrets history was never meant to reveal. The Eleusinian Mysteries, the rites of Demeter. The rites of Eleusis, or the Eleusinian Mysteries, were the secret rituals of the mystery school of Eleusis, and were observed regularly from c. 1600 BCE, 392 CE. Exactly what this mystic ritual was no one knows, but why the ancient Greeks participated in it can be understood by the testimonials of the initiated. The Eleusinian Mysteries, held each year at Eleusis, Greece, 14 miles northwest of Athens, were so important to the Greeks that, until the arrival of the Romans, the sacred way, the road from Athens to Eleusis, was the only road, not a goat path, in all of central Greece. The mysteries celebrated the story of Demeter and Persephone, but, as the initiated were sworn to secrecy on pain of death as to the details of the ritual, we do not know what form these rituals took. We do know, though, that those who participated in the mysteries were forever changed for the better, and that they no longer feared death. The rituals were based on a symbolic reading of the story of Demeter and Persephone, and provided initiates with a vision of the afterlife so powerful that it changed the way they saw the world and their place in it. Participants were freed from a fear of death through the recognition that they were immortal souls temporarily in mortal bodies. In the same way that Persephone went down to the land of the dead and returned to that of the living each year, so would every human being die only to live again on another plane of existence or in another body. Demeter and Persephone. The story of Demeter and Persephone is the most significant myth of ancient Greece precisely because of its influence on this understanding. While the Tales of Homer and Hesiod informed the culture, and those concerning Heracles were significant expressions of cultural values, the Demeter story offered something which other myths could not: a vision of eternal life and triumph over death. Demeter, the goddess of nature, had a daughter, Kore, which means maiden, who was kidnapped and by some accounts raped by Hades, lord of the underworld. Demeter searched for her Kore all across the earth in vain, finally coming to rest by a well in the city of Eleusis. There, disguised as an old woman, she cared for the queen's son, baptizing him nightly in fire so that he would be immortal. When the queen, one night, found her nursemaid placing her son in the fire, she was understandably upset, but not as angry as the grieving goddess, who then threw off her disguise and revealed her glory and her wrath. Mollified, as long as the people would build her a temple in Eleusis, Demeter taught the queen's son, Triptolemos, the art of agriculture. Zeus, king of the gods, persuaded Hades to return Kore to her mother as, in Demeter's grief, the crops were dying, people starving, the gods not receiving their accustomed tribute. Hades agreed but had tricked Kore into eating some pomegranate seeds, and if one ate in the land of the dead, one remained with the dead. As she had only eaten some, however, it was agreed she would spend half the year with Hades in the underworld and half with her mother on Earth. Kore emerged from the underworld as Persephone, she who brings doom, the queen of the dead, and while she remained on Earth, Demeter caused the world to be fruitful while, when Persephone was in the underworld, the plants withered and died. Thus the seasons were explained. More importantly, however, the myth reflected the concept of transformation and the cyclical nature of life. One's existence did not end with death because there was no death. There was only change from one state of being to another. The mysteries. The rituals were enacted twice a year. There were the lesser mysteries, which took place in the spring, and the greater mysteries which those who had been purified earlier took part in when September came. They walked the sacred way from Athens to Eleusis, calling for the Kore and reenacting Demeter's search for her lost daughter. At Eleusis they would rest by the well Demeter had sat down by, would fast, and would then drink a barley and mint beverage called Kykeon. It has been suggested that this drink was infused by the psychotropic fungus ergot, and this then heightened the experience and helped transform the initiate. After drinking the Kykeon, the participants entered the Telesterion, an underground theater where the secret ritual took place. Most likely it was a symbolic reenactment of the death and rebirth of Persephone which the initiates watched and perhaps took some part in. Whatever happened in the Telesterion, those who entered in would come out the next morning radically changed. Virtually every important thinker and writer in antiquity, everyone who was anyone, was an initiate of the mysteries. The testimonials. Plato, an initiate himself, as Socrates was before him, mentions the mysteries specifically in his famous dialogue on the immortality of the soul, the Phaedo. Our mysteries had a very real meaning. He that has been purified and initiated shall dwell with the gods. 69d, FJ Church Trans. In the myth of the last chapter of Plato's Republic, a warrior named is killed in battle and goes to the afterlife, but, unlike the others who accompany him, does not drink of the waters of the river Lethe, which would cause him to forget his life on earth and move forward into the next. Instead comes back to life on the battlefield and tells his companions about what he saw in the next world and what death is like. He makes it clear that death is not the end of one's life, but only the beginning of another part of the journey. Interestingly, Plato never introduces this story as a myth, as a fiction, but treats it as a factual account. The translation of the chapter as the myth of has been unfortunate, as it should actually be understood as the account or story of The report of is quite probably a reflection of the vision one received from the mysteries. Plutarch, writing to his wife on the death of their daughter, says, "Because of those sacred and faithful promises given in the mysteries, we hold it firmly for an undoubted truth that our soul is incorruptible and immortal. Let us behave ourselves accordingly." Hamilton, 179. Further, he says, "When a man dies, he is like those who are initiated into the mysteries. Our whole life is a journey by tortuous ways without outlet. At the moment of quitting it come terrors, shuddering fear, amazement. Then a light that moves to meet you, pure meadows that receive you, songs and dances and holy apparitions." Hamilton, 179. This description is quite similar to the report given by in his account. Cicero writes, "Nothing is higher than these mysteries. They have not only shown us how to live joyfully, but they have taught us how to die with a better hope." And the 20th century historian Will Durant states of the mysteries, "In this ecstasy of revelation, they felt the unity of God and the oneness of God and the soul. They were lifted up out of the delusion of individuality and knew the peace of absorption into deity." Durant, 189. Historian Waverley Fitzgerald sums the experience up clearly, writing, "It was said of those who were initiated at Eleusis that they no longer feared death, and it seems that this myth confirms the cyclical view of life central to pagan spirituality. That death is part of the cycle of life, and is always followed by rebirth, too. Every ancient testimonial reflects this same understanding, and each has the same tone of enlightened liberation from the fear of death. Egyptian influence. Just as important was a newfound meaning to one's life. Initiates recognized that their lives had an eternal purpose, and they were not just living to die. A belief in the transmigration of souls, reincarnation, seems to have been central to the vision of the mysteries, and this provided people with a sense of peace in that they would have another chance, many other chances, to experience life on earth in other forms. It is quite likely that the mysteries were influenced by Egyptian religious beliefs, which understood death as a transition to another phase of existence, not the end of one's life. The Egyptians had maintained this belief since at least the early dynastic period, c. 3150 c. 2613 BCE. And since there was contact between the two cultures through trade, it is probable that this Egyptian understanding contributed to the deeper interpretation of the Demeter and Persephone story and the vision of the mysteries. Although Egyptian belief regularly emphasized an ideal afterlife in the field of reeds, a paradise which was a mirror image of one's life on earth, it also recognized the spiritual reality of reincarnation, as did most pre-Christian religious. Time was considered cyclical, not linear, and one could recognize the pattern of the universe through the changing seasons and understand that, just as trees, grass, and flowers died in one season and returned to life in another, so would human beings. The end. The Eleusinian Mysteries differed from conventional religious practice in that initiates were experiencing firsthand what others were only hearing about in the temples. The traditional worship of the gods was founded on stories told of how the universe worked, the will of the gods, and what those gods had done. The difference between this kind of religious experience and that of the mysteries would be the same as that of acting in a play compared with hearing about a performance. The actors are going to have a much different and more meaningful experience. Even so, there is no indication that initiates looked down on traditional religious practices or considered themselves superior. Plato most likely did, but only because he already thought he was better than his contemporaries. The mysteries were enacted for over 1,000 years, and in that time, provided countless people with a higher understanding of life and what waited beyond death. The rituals were closed down by the Christian Emperor Theodosius in 392 CE, as he saw the ancient rites as inspiring resistance to Christianity and the truth of Christ. As Christianity gained more adherents and power, pagan rituals were systematically stamped out, although core meanings, iconography, and symbolism would be appropriated by the new faith and transformed to support the belief in Jesus Christ as the Messiah. The former sites of great pagan ritual and learning were abandoned, destroyed, or turned into churches throughout the 4th and 5th centuries CE. The temple of Demeter and every sacred site in Eleusis was sacked by the Arian Christians with Alaric, king of the Goths, in his invasion of 396 CE, leaving only ruins and rubble where once the people of the ancient world gathered to experience viscerally the truths of life, of death, and the promise of rebirth. Science. The term science comes from the Latin word scientia, meaning knowledge. It can be defined as a systematic attempt to discover, by means of observation and reasoning, particular facts about the world, and to establish laws connecting facts with one another, and in some cases, to make it possible to predict future occurrences. There are other ways to define science, but all definitions refer in one way or another to this attempt to discover specific facts, and the ability to figure out patterns in which these facts are connected. There is an interesting quote from Carl Sagan about the scientific attitude. If we lived on a planet where nothing ever changed, there would be little to do. There would be nothing to figure out. There would be no impetus for science. And if we lived in an unpredictable world where things changed in random or very complex ways, we would not be able to figure things out. But we live in an in-between universe where things change, but according to patterns, rules, or as we call them, laws of nature. If I throw a stick up in the air, it always falls down. If the sun sets in the west, it always rises again the next morning in the east. And so it becomes possible to figure things out. We can do science, and with it, we can improve our lives. Carl Sagan. Early scientific developments. The regular occurrence of natural events encouraged the development of some scientific disciplines. After a period of observation and careful record-keeping, even some of the events perceived as random and unpredictable might begin to display a regular pattern, which initially was not immediately obvious. Eclipses are a good example. In North America, the Cherokee said that eclipses were caused when the moon male visits his wife, the sun, and the Ojibwe believed the sun would be totally extinguished during an eclipse, so they used to shoot flaming arrows to keep it alight. Stephen Hawking mentions that according to the Vikings, the sun and the moon are being chased by two wolves, Skal and Hati. When either wolf successfully catches their prey, an eclipse occurs. The Nordics made as much noise as they could to scare off the wolves, so they could rescue the victims. Skal, a wolf, is called who pursues the shining god to the protecting woods, and another is Hati. He is Hrodvitnir's son, who chases the bright bride of heaven. The Poetic Edda, Grimnir's sayings. Hawking goes on, saying that people eventually realized that the sun and the moon would emerge from the eclipse regardless of whether they made noise to rescue the victims. In societies where they had record-keeping on celestial events, they must have noticed after some time that eclipses do not happen at random, but rather in regular patterns that repeat themselves. Some events in nature clearly occur according to rules, but there are others that do not display a clear pattern of occurrence, and they do not even seem to happen as a result of a specific cause. Earthquakes, storms, and pestilence all appear to occur randomly, and natural explanations do not seem to be relevant. Therefore, supernatural explanations arose to account for such events, most of them merged with myth and legends. Supernatural explanations gave rise to magic, an attempt to control nature by means of rites and spells. Magic is based on people's confidence that nature can be directly controlled. Magic thought is convinced that by performing certain spells, a specific event will take place. James Fraser has suggested that there is a link between magic and science since both believe in the cause and effect principle. In magic, the causes are somehow unclear and they tend to be based upon spontaneous thoughts, while in science, through careful observation and reasoning, the causes are better isolated and understood. Science is founded on the idea that experience, effort, and reason are valid, while magic is founded on intuition and hope. In ancient times, it was common for science to be merged with magic, religion, mysticism, and philosophy, since the limits of the scientific discipline were not fully understood. Babylonian science. Like in Egypt, priests encouraged much of the development of Babylonian science. Babylonians used a numeral system with 60 as its base, which allowed them to divide circles into 360 degrees. The use of 60 as a base of a mathematical system is not a minor issue. 60 is a number that has many divisors 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30, 60, which simplifies the representation of fractions. 1, 2, 30, 60, 1, 3, 20, 60, 1, 4, 15, 60, 1, 5, 12, 60, 1, 6, 10, 60, and so forth. As early as 1800 BCE, Babylonian mathematicians understood the properties of elementary sequences, such as arithmetic and geometrical progressions, and a number of geometrical relationships. They estimated the value of pi as 318, which is about a 0.6% error. It is highly likely that they also were familiar with what we today call the Pythagorean theorem, which states that the square of the longest side of a right triangle equals the sum of the squares of the other two sides. However, we have no evidence that the Babylonians proved it formally, since their mathematics rested on empirical knowledge rather than formal proof. It was in astronomy where Babylonians showed a remarkable talent, and magic, mysticism, astrology, and divination were its main drivers. They believed that the movement of the heavenly bodies forecasted some terrestrial event. Since the reign of Nabonassar, 747 BCE, the Babylonians kept complete lists of eclipses, and by 700 BCE, it was already known that solar eclipses could only be possible during new moons and lunar eclipses only during full moons. It is possible that by this time Babylonians also knew the rule that lunar eclipses take place every 6 months, or occasionally every 5 months. By the time Nebuchadnezzar ruled Babylon, the priests had also calculated the courses of the planets and plotted the orbits of the sun and the moon. Egyptian science. Despite their superstitions, Egyptian priests encouraged the development of many scientific disciplines, especially astronomy and mathematics. The construction of the pyramids and other astonishing monuments would have been impossible without highly developed mathematical knowledge. The Rhind mathematical papyrus, also known as the Alms papyrus, is an ancient mathematical treatise dating back to approximately 1650 BCE. This work explains, using several examples, how to calculate the area of a field, the capacity of a barn, and it also deals with algebraic equations of the first degree. In the opening section, its author, a scribe named Alms, declares that the papyrus is a transcription of an ancient copy, possibly 500 years before the time of Alms himself. The flooding of the Nile, which constantly altered the border markers that separated the different portions of land, also encouraged the development of mathematics. Egyptian land surveyors had to perform measurements over and over again to restore the boundaries that had been lost. In fact, this is the origin of the word geometry, measurement of land. Egyptian land surveyors were very practical-minded. In order to form right angles, which was critical for establishing the borders of a field, they used a rope divided into 12 equal parts, forming a triangle with 3 parts on one side, 4 parts on the second side, and 5 parts on the remaining side. The right angle was to be found where the 3-unit side joined the 4-unit side. In other words, Egyptians knew that a triangle whose sides are in a 3:4:5 ratio is a right triangle. This is a useful rule of thumb, and it is also a step away from the Pythagoras theorem, which is based on stretching the 3:4:5 triangle concept to its logical limit. Egyptians calculated the value of the mathematical constant pi at 256.81 and for the value of the square root of 2, they used the fraction 7/5, which they thought of as 1/5 times. For fractions, they always used the numerator 1. In order to express 3/4, they wrote 1/2 plus 1/4. Unfortunately, they did not know the zero, and their numeral system lacked simplicity. 27 signs were required to express 999. Greek science. Unlike other parts of the world where science was strongly connected with religion, Greek scientific thought had a stronger connection with philosophy. As a result, the Greek scientific spirit had a more secular approach, and was able to replace the notion of supernatural explanation with the concept of a universe that is governed by laws of nature. Greek tradition credits Thales of Miletus as the first Greek who, around 600 BCE, developed the idea that the world can be explained in natural terms. Thales lived in Miletus, a Greek city located in Ionia, the central sector of Anatolia's Aegean shore in Asia Minor, present-day Turkey. This city was the main focus of the Ionian Awakening, the initial phase of classical Greek civilization, a time when the ancient Greeks developed a number of ideas surprisingly similar to some of our modern scientific concepts. One of the great advantages of Greece was the influence of Egyptian mathematics. When Egypt opened its ports to Greek trade during the 26th dynasty, c. 680–5525 BCE, and Babylonian astronomy, after Alexander's conquest of Asia Minor and Mesopotamia during Hellenistic times, the Greeks were very talented at systematically innovating upon the Egyptian and Babylonian mathematical and astronomical knowledge. This turned the Greeks into some of the most competent mathematicians and astronomers of antiquity, and their achievements in geometry were arguably the finest. While observation was important at the beginning, Greek science eventually began to undervalue observation in favor of the deductive process, where knowledge is built by means of pure thought. This method is key in mathematics, and the Greeks put such an emphasis on it that they falsely believed that deduction was the way to obtain the highest knowledge. Observation was underestimated, deduction was made king, and Greek scientific knowledge was led up a blind alley in virtually every branch of science other than exact sciences, mathematics. Indian science. In India, we find some aspects of astronomical science already in the Vedas, composed between 1500 and 1000 BCE, where the year is divided into 12 lunar months, occasionally adding an additional month to adjust the lunar with the solar year. 6 seasons of the year are named and related to different gods, and also the different phases of the moon are observed and personified as different deities. Many of the ceremonies and sacrificial rites of Indian society were regulated by the position of the moon, the sun, and other astronomical events, which encouraged a detailed study of astronomy. Geometry was developed in India as a result of strict religious rules for the construction of altars. Book 5 of the Taittiriya Samhita, included in the Yajurveda, describes the different shapes that the altars could have. The oldest of these altars had the shape of a falcon and an area of 7.5 squares purusha. A purusha was a unit equivalent to the height of a man with uplifted arms, about 7.6 feet or 2.3 meters. Sometimes other altar shapes were required, such as a wheel, a tortoise, or a triangle, but the area of these new altars had to remain the same, 7.5 square purusha. Some other times, the size of the altar had to be increased without changing the shape or the relative proportion of the figure. All these procedures were impossible to carry out without a fine knowledge of geometry. A work known as the Shulba Sutras, first composed in India around 800 BCE, contains detailed explanations of how to perform all the geometrical operations required to support the religious procedures regarding the altars. This text also develops mathematical topics such as square roots and squaring the circle. After developing important geometrical studies, religious practices changed in India, and the need for geometrical knowledge gradually died out as the construction of altars fell out of use. Possibly the most influential achievement of Hindu science was the study of arithmetic, particularly the development of the numbers and the decimal notation that the world uses today. The so-called Arabic numbers actually originated in India. They already appear in the rock edicts of the Mauryan Emperor Ashoka, 3rd century BCE. about 1,000 years before they are used in Arabic literature. Chinese science. In China, the priesthood never had any significant political power. In many cultures, science was encouraged by the priesthood, who were interested in astronomy and the calendar. But in China, it was government officials who had the power and were concerned with these areas, and therefore the development of Chinese science is strongly linked to government officials. The court astronomers were particularly interested in the sciences of astronomy and mathematics, since the calendar was a sensitive imperial matter. The life of the sky and the life on Earth had to develop in harmony, and the sun and the moon regulated the different festivals. During the time of Confucius, c. 551 to c. 479 BCE, Chinese astronomers successfully calculated the occurrence of eclipses. Geometry developed as a result of the need to measure land, while algebra was imported from India. During the 2nd century BCE, after many centuries and generations, a mathematical treatise named the 9 Chapters on the Mathematical Art was completed. This work contained mostly practical mathematical procedures, including topics such as determining the areas of fields of different shapes for taxation purposes, pricing of different goods, commodities rate exchange, and equitable taxation. This book develops algebra and geometry, and also mentions negative quantities for the first time in recorded history. Zhu Changzhai, 429–500 CE, estimated the right value of pi to the 6th decimal place and improved the magnet, which had been discovered centuries earlier. Where the Chinese displayed an exceptional talent was at making inventions. Gunpowder, paper, woodblock printing, and the compass, known as the south-pointing needle, are some of the many Chinese inventions. Despite their immense creativity, it is ironic that Chinese industrial life did not undergo any significant development between the Han Dynasty, 206 BCE to 20 CE, to the fall of the Manchu, 1912 CE. Mesoamerican science. Mesoamerican mathematics and astronomy were highly precise. The accuracy of the Maya calendar was comparable to the Egyptian calendar. Both civilizations fixed the year at 365 days. And already in the 1st century CE, the Maya used the number 0 as a placeholder value in their records, many centuries before the 0 appears in European and Asian literature. Time record-keeping in Mesoamerica included a 260-day period known by the Maya as Tzolk'in, count of days, and tonal Pohualli by the Aztecs. This interval was obtained by combining cycles of 20 days with 13 numerical coefficients. 20 x 13 equals 260. The origin of this interval is believed to be around the 6th century BCE in the southern region of the Zapotec civilization, and it is in tune with some important natural events. 260 is a good approximation of the human gestation period, and in mid-Mesoamerican latitude is perfectly consistent with the agricultural cycle. There was also a 360-day period known as Tun by the Maya, composed of cycles of 20 days and 18 months. 20 x 18 equals 360. Most Mesoamerican calendars would be based on 1 Tun plus an additional month of 5 days. 360 plus 5 equals 365, which is a good approximation of the solar cycle. This count regulated the holidays, religious ceremonies, sacrifices, work life, tributes, and many other aspects of religious, political, and social life. The 260 and the 365-day count would be run simultaneously, and every 52 years the starting point of both would match up, an event termed as a calendar round. The Aztec codices suggest that during the time of a calendar round, it was believed that the world was vulnerable to destruction, So at that time, they held a number of sacrifices and religious ceremonies in order to please the gods and ensure the world would continue. The Mayas created the longest Mesoamerican calendar cycle by multiplying 1 ton by 20, 360 days x 20 equals 7,200 days, or 1 katon, and 1 katon by 20, 7,200 days x 20 equals 144,000 days, or 1 bakdun. The Mayan long count was composed of 13 bakduns. 144,000 days x 13 equals 1,872,000 days, or 5,125.37 years. The starting point of the Mayan long count is August 11, 3114 BCE, and it ended on December 21, 2012 BCE. Ancient Greek science. Ancient Greek science is a modern term for the application of systematic inquiry into the individual, the world, and the universe, which began in Ionia in the 6th century BCE with Thales of Miletus, LC 585 BCE, and continued through the work of the astronomer Ptolemy, L 170 CE, to form the foundation of modern scientific method. Thales and the other pre-Socratic philosophers who came after him were influenced by the works of the Babylonians and Egyptians, but developed these earlier concepts to explain the world and the individual's place in it, apart from the prevailing theistic vision of their time. Although many discussions of ancient Greek science begin with Hesiod, 8th century BCE, and his calendar, he still held to the theistic explanation for how the world worked. Thales, while not denying the existence of the gods, explored the possibility that the world worked naturally on its own without them. The goal of the early pre-Socratic philosophers was to find the first cause of existence, the basic stuff of the universe, from which everything else proceeded. From inquiries into the first cause, the pre-Socratics explored other aspects of the human condition, including one's purpose in life, the existence of an afterlife, and the nature of reality. Although it cannot be said that any of the pre-Socratics, or many of those thinkers who came after them, applied the scientific method to their inquiries, or were scientists in the modern understanding of that term, their efforts were a significant departure from how the Greeks understood themselves and their world, setting the stage for the development of scientific thought and method as those terms are understood today. Thales and the first cause. The pre-Socratic philosophers, so called because they predate the philosopher Socrates of Athens, beginning with Thales, made this departure on the understanding that the universe and world was knowable. One's mind could be used to study observable phenomena and form conclusions as to its cause, rather than accepting the explanation that all things existed and operated as they did according to the will of supernatural entities. What is often referred to as a scientific revolution took place in Ionia, Western Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, in the 6th century BCE, and it is thought most likely because the Ionians were not as firmly anchored in traditions of the past as others in mainland Greece. The port cities along the coast regularly welcomed ships from the Near East and Mediterranean, bringing with them new ideas and different ways of interpreting the world. Merchants from Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Phoenicia exchanged ideas as well as goods with the Ionians, who also traveled themselves. Thales is understood to have studied in Babylon, where he would have been introduced to various Egyptian concepts, and may have also traveled to Egypt himself. Among these concepts would have been the understanding of the universe as eternal. In both Egyptian and Mesopotamian religion, the gods had always existed, and so something was already present for them to exist in. Thales asked what this something was, what the underlying form of existence could be, and this question became the starting point for all others. Scholar Thomas Cahill comments, what faced the pre-Socratic philosophers. Every day, however, was not the eternal but the mutable. All the multiplicity, diversity, motion, and change they perceived in individual beings that go from non-existence to birth and life, and finally, to death, decay, and non-existence. Likewise, the earth beneath their feet and even the sky above their heads presented them with panoramas of constant change. It is not possible, they reasoned, to make sense of what is mutable, what is becoming, what passes so fleetingly into existence and then is gone forever. But because there is also in our experience a quality of permanence, individuals die but humanity remains, the crops return each year, the orchards bloom once more, the zodiac comes full circle. We do not live in an arbitrary universe but a patterned one. If this is so, there must be an underlying thing that never changes, never has changed, and never will change, the uncreated material out of which all the mutable things spring. Thales claimed this first cause was water. When water was cooled, it became ice, a solid, and when heated, vapor, air. Through its course in a channel, it moved other objects such as stones or ships or people, while also providing a home to fish and other aquatic life and sustaining human life as well. Based on these observations, Thales made his famous claim, and in their refutation of that claim, the pre-Socratics who followed him began the process of what one would now call scientific inquiry. Pre-Socratics as scientists. Anaximander, LC 610 to C 546 BCE, who may have been Thales' student, rejected his claim and replaced it with a creative force he called the apeiron, the unlimited, boundless, infinite, or indefinite, Baird 10. This force had always existed, and through it, all things were brought into being, were destroyed, and were reformed. No observable element could be the first cause precisely because it was observable. Water itself required a cause for its existence. Anaximenes, LC 546 BCE, rejected the apeiron as unprovable and claimed air as the first cause, using essentially the same reasoning as Thales had for water. These early pre-Socratics set the pattern for those who followed in making empirical observations that led them to conclusions, but these conclusions never seem to have been tested. The works of the pre-Socratics exist only in fragments and references by later writers, so there is no way to know for certain whether any hypothesis was actually tested, but based on what is known of their process, it does not seem so. Regarding the claim that the pre-Socratics were the first scientists, scholar Robin Waterfield notes, "Scientific reasoning is a combination of forming testable hypotheses to account for observed phenomena, and of testing and retesting these hypotheses by experimentation and logic. The resulting hypothesis should explain the observed phenomena in as simple a way as possible, should allow one to predict the behavior of related phenomena, and should cohere with the body of accepted scientific theories and doctrines. Throughout, everything should be quantifiable, measurable, and testable as far as is possible within the limitations of the technology currently available." There is absolutely no indication that the pre-Socratics were scientists in this sense. There is little sign that they undertook experimentation at all, of course. It is not entirely fair to criticize the pre-Socratics for lack of experimentation. After all, a great deal of what interested them was not capable of empirical testing in their day. But that in itself helps to show that they should not be described as scientists in the modern sense of the word. While this is true, the pre-Socratics did point the way toward the kind of process that would eventually become the scientific method. And so, as Waterfield also observes, they could be regarded as proto-scientists. Pythagoras, LC 571 to C 497 BCE, after all, could not prove. The soul was immortal but made the attempt through his claim that mathematics was the underlying form of reality, And as numbers have no end but repeat in different combinations, so too might the soul return repeatedly to earth through reincarnation. This is not a hypothesis that could be tested, but the claim at least rests on an observable phenomenon, numbers and their combinations, as opposed to the prevailing view of the Greeks that the gods, or other supernatural entities, were responsible for any given phenomena. Xenophanes of Colophon, LC 570 to c. 478 BCE, rejected the anthropomorphic gods of the Greeks, claiming there was one god, unlike humans in any way, who created and sustained all things, while Heraclitus of Ephesus, LC 500 BCE, dismissed the need for a first cause entirely, claiming the nature of life was constant change, coming into being and passing away, and so change was life, not an aspect of existence, but existence itself. This claim was refuted by Parmenides, LC 485 BCE, and his student Zeno of Elea, LC 465 BCE, who advocated for the unity of existence. To them, change was an illusion, and all one experienced was actually one and forever unchanging. These claims inspired the other pre-Socratics like Empedocles, LC 484–424 BCE, Anaxagoras, LC 500 to c. 428 BCE, Democritus, LC 460 to c. 370 BCE, and Leucippus, LC 5th century BCE, whose works formed the basis for the understanding of the atomic universe. Drawing on the claims of the others, Democritus was the first to advance the concept of tiny, uncutables, known as atomos, atoms, that formed everything in the observable world. Systematic development and definition. The works of the pre-Socratics as a whole provided the foundation for Socrates, who applied their method of inquiry, observation, and conclusion to human behavior and ethics. Rather than accepting what one was taught, Socrates said, one should question every claim to determine its truth, and further, whether one was living truly or only according to the script one had been taught to learn by others. Plato, L 424–423–3, 48–3–47 BCE, systematized the Socratic method, or invented it, through his dialogues depicting various characters in conversation with Socrates, through which a reader is forced to confront questions on the nature of life and one's response to it. Plato's work is so comprehensive in scope, it touches on disciplines as varied as the modern concepts of science, philosophy, literary criticism, political science, religion, and law, to name only a few. The systematic exploration of a subject was applied to the medical arts by Hippocrates, LC 460 to c. 370 BCE, the father of modern medicine, who arrived at his conclusions through observation and experimentation. Plato's student Aristotle, L 384–322 BCE, applied this same technique to, literally, every subject then known to humanity. His student Theophrastus, LC 371 to c. 287 BCE, continued his work in subjects ranging from physics to biology, and his inquiry into plants and on the causes of plants earned him the epithet Father of Botany. Although Aristotle and Theophrastus are often cited as early scientists, they, like the pre-Socratics, also fail to live up to the modern definition, as characterized by the 7 steps of the scientific method. Roman science. The Romans assimilated earlier Greek science for their own purposes, evaluating and then accepting or rejecting that which was most useful, much as they did in other fields such as warfare, art, and theater. This assimilation of Greek thought began in the 2nd century BCE, and ideas often came with their practitioners. For example, the first specialist architects and doctors in the Roman world were very often Greek. The Roman respect for ancient Greek scholars continued right up to the end of the empire, and so Roman scientists, even if their own innovations were largely more concerned with refinements than new ideas outright, managed to document and record a long, ancient tradition of scientific thought, so preserving it for posterity. The old approach of historians that the Romans had no significant science of their own has now been reassessed to reflect their practical contributions to the evolution of fields like architecture, engineering, and medicine, which were underpinned by progress in such sciences as geometry, physics, and biology. Attitudes to science. One notable distinction of Roman scientists was their desire for authoritative answers to any questions they had about the world. In addition, for the practical Roman mind, science had to provide useful information which could be used to ensure successful outcomes of real projects. Long and ultimately purposeless discussion and research on a purely theoretical level were not for the Roman scientist. Physics had to be of practical use to produce effective torsion catapults. Biology must improve agricultural yields, and mathematics and geometry must combine to provide the best answers in order to build the most impressive domes and arches. This pursuit of scientific knowledge was very often sponsored by wealthy private individuals who sought the benefits of a reputation with the public as an active promoter of culture. Roman science authors. A number of Roman authors stand out who attempted to study earlier Greek science and forge this body of knowledge with some new discoveries and theories into a corpus of practically useful ideas suitable for the Roman way of life. Cato, b. 234 BCE. The famous orator also wrote a valuable treatise, De Agricultura, which gave advice on how to run a good estate with notes on wine and oil production and various remedies for crop diseases. Varro, b. 116 BCE, was the most prolific scientific author, although very little of his work survives. One exception is the Res Rustici, which describes the best ways to manage a large estate. His other works on mathematics, geography, biology, and more live on through his immense influence on later authors such as Vitruvius, Pliny, Augustine, and Marcianus Capella. Cicero, b. 106 BCE. Famous as an orator and politician, his great contribution to science was putting the Greek corpus into Latin, and his works on philosophy proved especially influential in the field of cosmology and physics. Julius Caesar, b. 100 BCE. His Gallic Wars included much on geography, and he composed a lost work on the stars. Lucretius, b.c. 94 BCE, wrote De Rerum Natura on the major Greek works of atomist philosophy and was especially interested in optics and biology. Nigidius, 1st century BCE, wrote works which survive only in fragments on astronomy, zoology, weather, and human nature. Vitruvius, 1st century BCE, wrote an influential work on architecture, De Architectura, which included surveying, town planning, mathematics, principles of proportion, materials, astronomy, and mechanics. Seneca, his work on natural philosophy included studies of meteorology, earthquakes, volcanoes, comets, and meteors. Columella, b. 50 CE, wrote the most comprehensive manual on agricultural best practice. The 12 books, designed to advise large estate owners, covered such areas as viticulture, horticulture, animal husbandry, farm calendars, and the best layout for a villa. Marcus Manilius, 1st century CE, wrote 5 volumes on astrology, his Astronomica. Pomponius Mela, 1st century CE, composed an extensive survey of Mediterranean and North European geography published in his 3-volume De Chorographia. Aulus Cornelius Celsus, 1st century CE, who compiled a vast encyclopedia, 8 volumes of which, the De Medicina, examined medical science, old and new, and such topics as diet, therapy, and surgery. Scribonius Largus, BC 1 CE, compiled a handbook, the Compositiones Prescriptions, of medical remedies especially useful for gladiators. Pliny the Elder, BC 23 CE, compiled a 36-volume encyclopedia, the Naturalis Historia, on the natural world, animal, vegetable, and mineral. He himself claimed that his work contained no fewer than 20,000 facts. Frontinus, DC 103 CE, composed works on military science, especially war machines, and wrote on the water systems of Rome in his De Equis Urbis Rami. Galen, B. 129 CE, of Greek origin, who became a physician to emperors after starting his career administering medical aid to gladiators. He is an invaluable source on earlier medical matters, notably Hippocrates, but was also a successful practitioner of complex surgeries himself. Late Empire attitudes to science. In the mid-3rd century CE, scientific thought was transformed, along with religion and philosophy, by the Neoplatonist thinkers Platinos of Egypt and Porphyry of Syria. One of the many subsequent Neoplatonist scholars to illustrate the breadth of subjects they discussed was Marcianus Capella, c. 430 CE, who wrote on geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, music theory, and geography. In addition to this new approach, the monotheism of Christianity had spread to become the official state religion by the 4th century CE. Christians were wary of any scientific theories contrary to their view of the universe, but the two positions were not necessarily antagonistic, and several important scientists were actually Christians. For example, Chalcidius, c. 375 CE, who wrote widely on cosmology. Medical scientists continued to be prolific authors. Notable names from the period are Marcellus of Bordeaux, c. 400 CE, who wrote a vast collection of remedies, and Theodorus Priscianus, Caelius Aurelianus, c. 450 CE, and Vegetius, who all drew on earlier, often now lost, works. By the 5th century CE and the collapse of the Western Empire, Roman science ceased to possess any identifiable character, but two authors who stand out from the period are Cassiodorus Senator, 485 CE, and Boethius, c. 520 CE, who both, once again, displayed the Roman reverence for Greek sources and tradition. Scientific achievements. Architecture. The Romans adopted the Greek architectural orders, added the composite capital and Tuscan column to the repertoire, and generally made their buildings much more intricately decorative. Ambitious in their monumental building projects, they were driven to use bricks in new ways, to build wide-spanning arches and supporting buttresses, even to invent a new type of concrete which was lightweight enough for large domes and water-resistant enough for harbor moles. New types of buildings appeared such as the basilica, triumphal arch, monumental aqueduct, amphitheater, and granary building. There were also huge bath complexes with rooms of differing temperatures and underheated floors and pools, and multi-story residential housing blocks for the poorer classes. Such projects required complex designs using wide-ranging mathematical skills, and the result was an emphasis no longer merely on the structure and blocks of the building, but on the magnificence of the space these materials enclosed. Astronomy and astrology. The Romans adopted much of what the Greeks and Ptolemaic Egypt had achieved previously in the field of astronomy. Measuring time using sundials did become more accurate in the Roman period when even portable sundials became popular, sometimes with changeable discs to compensate for changes in location. Public sundials were present in all major towns, and their popularity is evidenced in archaeological finds such as 35 from Pompeii alone. A 7-day astrological week was adopted during the reign of Augustus. Astrology, also adopted from Ptolemaic Egypt, was popular with the Romans, and as in many other ancient cultures, the link between the movements of celestial bodies and the signs of the zodiac with the human experience was taken as certain, even if there were a few skeptics amongst scholars. Astrologists were often used by emperors to demonstrate to the populace that their decisions and policies were always the best ones, although Augustus prohibited them giving consultations to private citizens. Agriculture. The Romans were well aware, as documented in the work of Columella amongst others, of the importance of climate, soil type, and land formation in ensuring the best production results. Techniques familiar to 19th century CE European farmers were used effectively by the Romans, such as crop rotation, pruning, grafting, seed selection, drainage, irrigation, and manuring. Some specialized industries such as viticulture easily matched the output of 20th century CE producers. Tools were developed ranging from wheeled plows to oxen-drawn harvesting machines, which dramatically improved efficiency. Grinding mills and sieves, developed to produce finer flour for bread making, and buildings were purpose-built to better store harvests. Farmers knew the value of greenhouses and even experimented with genetic modifications such as crossing apples with pumpkins. Animal husbandry skills developed too, so that sheep, cows, goats, poultry, and pigs were reared with success. Their size and the quality of wool are evidence that the Romans were as expert as any animal breeders before or since. Game such as rabbit, hare, boar, and deer were successfully farmed in large enclosed areas of forest. Fish and sea life were similarly farmed in artificial and controlled environments, where water was changed regularly, sometimes even heated, and the best artificial feed developed. The Romans also became adept at preserving their food using all manner of techniques such as smoking, salting, drying, curing, pickling in brine or vinegar, and storing in honey. Engineering. The Romans were great engineers and constantly strived to master the natural environment and test the limits of physics. Not only were aqueducts huge building projects, built up to 50 meters in height when spanning valleys and bringing water up to 100 km from its source, but they also employed many engineering tricks to aid water flow and increase purity. Inverted siphons, stopcocks, settling tanks, aerating cascades, and mesh filters. Tunnels were constructed to provide more direct routes for aqueducts and roads, and excavated with surveying precision to enter and exit a mountain at precisely the desired spot. Watermills harnessed water power from rivers using sophisticated systems of wheels and gears, and used the energy gained to drive mills for flour production, for saws to cut marble, or as ore crushers in search of precious metals. Warfare and the fact that technological innovation very often guaranteed victory meant that the Romans sought to perfect such essentials of the ancient battlefield as siege engines and artillery weapons. Roman weapons fired bigger missiles, further and more accurately, than had ever been seen before. The mechanics of torsion machines was mastered, and they even devised ways to disassemble their artillery to easily move it to another place where it could be rebuilt and used again.